Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Occulted. And I am so glad to be here with you today. So, in our last episode, I went through the comments and grabbed a bunch of your questions, and we're going to do that same thing again today. I think it's important that we have a good foundation of what was discussed in the first three episodes to move on to the next episodes. So, let's continue to see what you guys said in the comment section. This is from Micah Miller at Micah Miller 6326, and you said exactly what I've been thinking. There's so much going on around the topic of Kirk's assassination that it almost seems like intentional divisiveness. The videos pointing out left-wing fanatics cheering his death, or pointing to Israel or China, or even all the different conflicting reports about the supposed killer, which feeds narratives on either side of the political spectrum. It just reeks of trying to get us to be at each other's throats rather than us coming together in support and brotherly love. Oh, 100%. So the real way that we confront this is we all have to come together around our humanity, around our humanness. You know, all of the little things politically and socially and personally, they matter. But when the culture becomes this divisive, we also have to understand that, we're not going to agree on everything, but that we actually don't have to agree on everything to come together around the basics, to come together around basic objective truths. And that's what we're really seeing in the last, I think, 5 years, especially with the pandemic and now with the Kirk assassination, that it's actually difficult for us as a society to even come together around very basic truths. And we're just seeing this even more now as we go forward. And that has to do with, obviously, so much of us as a people just not being healed and projecting our wounds out into the world and not dealing with people as we are, but just projecting our pain and our trauma onto each other and just having this shadow dance. And this is outside of objective reality that's going on. We're projecting our pain onto each other and just going back and forth in a completely unproductive, divisive, and eventually destructive pattern that we have to overcome. And so Micah Miller is 100% right here. I do want to point out that this was also the environment of the so-called COVID pandemic, in which you saw the same kind of confusion, the same kind of conflicting reports. You have experts coming forward that say one thing one day, say another thing the other day, and another day. And it does seem to be part of psychological warfare to create an environment of complete conflict, to feed one side of the aisle that doesn't believe something's going on, and then the next day feed the other side of the aisle that does believe something's going on. And what it does is it creates social decay. It creates the decline of us, because there is no objective truth that's being revealed by the people that we have elected and trust to lead us. Leadership has become more inclined to create chaos, right? Look at the last 5 to 10 years, than they are to actually provide order and leadership in which we can actually kind of come together and evolve. So this is a fundamental problem right now in our culture, in our government, and with each other, right? The leadership should be the people that are staying up day and night, grinding to come forward and present to us, the people that they serve, the most accurate, hard-hitting presentation of what has happened, to just basically respect humanity. But instead, we're getting, there was an image of the Mauser that was released to a newspaper outlet that wasn't even an official FBI picture. Why would you do that other than to create chaos? There's clips missing from the rooftop video of apparently Tyler Robinson running away from the scene, but the actual shot of him in prone position is missing. These things are purposely being fed out into the public, obviously, in order to create chaos. And if you've watched the last few videos, you'll know that chaos is part of death magic. It's part of the dark occult. The dark occult magicians are chaos magicians. That's what they do. They create chaos in the world in order to introduce a new order, not around God, not around creating natural law for everyone to evolve, but in order to create a system around themselves as gods, themselves as the new royalty, themselves as the new leaders, the aristocracy, a forced aristocracy, forced through technology, forced through murder. This is what's on their agenda, clearly. So and it's the most wacky thing, like, are we really going to sit here and pretend like police and the FBI and other agencies that deal with this, they don't know how to work a crime scene? Are we going to pretend that they don't know how to work a crime scene, that they do not know how to solve a crime all of a sudden? We need to pave over it with cement. We need to replace the plant pots. We need to remove. So the kinds of things that we are allowing, as we're not really allowing them, many people are leading the charge on this, and I think that's wonderful, because we should not accept something that is very clearly beneath us. You know, it's absolutely ridiculous to think that the FBI, to think that they don't know how to work a crime scene. So it's this degeneration and insulting of basic structures that we already know that we have, that we already know that we've been able to do in the past, just aren't suddenly functioning anymore. Like, okay, right? So this is obviously all part of creating chaos, all part of creating confusion. It's part of the ritual, in my opinion, if we are to view it from an occultist standpoint. So there's been other people that have come forward, I believe, that directly deal with psychological operations, not the occult side necessarily, but they can speak about this from the perspective of a psychological operation and the importance of confusion, the importance of chaos, the importance of obscuring so that people can't agree. That is also a complete hallmark of a psychological operation if you stand back and look at it, which is why so many people don't trust the reports. They don't trust it, right, on a gut level. So how we deal with this is we have to enforce the laws that we already have. We have to support and enforce the systems that we already have that already have protocols to deal with this. They're just being avoided. They're not being done properly. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have to enforce and protect what we already have. And we have to come together as a people. We don't have to agree on every single tiny political point. We don't have to at this point in time. We just have to keep things together. And then once we can have some kind of established healthy normalcy, then we can discuss the nuances. But right now we just need to come together under very basic truths, very basic realities, to just preserve our unity, to preserve what we have and what our ancestors have built for us, right? So we don't completely decline. All right, so the next question is from Tree Seer 1573. And you said, but don't people know this information? People don't know this information about occultism. So how will it change? There is a distinct lack of awareness of the public. And a lot of that is because people are just going about their daily lives. They're going to carpool, they're going to work, they're looking at the price of gas, the price of groceries. And these activities are often so all consuming that there isn't a whole lot of time or energy or effort, to contemplate whether or not the government is corrupt and how corrupt and since when and exactly what is the truth. But over time, it's going to become more and more difficult to deny this. It's going to become more and more obvious that there is a direct affront to freedom and to a healthy way of life, that there is an encroaching, uncomfortable control system used by technology. We're going to have to confront that. So there isn't an awareness now, but as time goes on, it's going to be harder and harder to not notice it. And I think that's where the battle sort of intensifies. But I would say that, people have to trust, their gut instinct. They have to trust on a just basic level. Like, you don't have to have all of these books on esoterica memorized to know when something's evil and when people are up to no good. You can feel that in your body. You can feel that in your gut. And so I think so much of perception and analysis begins in the body. It begins with a bad feeling or a good feeling. And that's really where everyone can begin to sense their intuition and work from a more spiritual psychic place. Is just, how does your body feel around this person? Or when you look at something going on, does this seem right to you? It begins as very instinctual. It begins around our survival. That's how we begin to get a broader and broader perspective, is to just feel the truth actually in our body. And then once we can do that, then we get curiosity, and then we can begin to study and we can begin to educate ourselves. But it doesn't, believe it or not, it doesn't actually take the entire populace realizing that something shady is going on to create change. It has never happened. There's never been a time, even something like the American Revolution or the French Revolution or any kind of revolutionary period. Actually, the public has never completely agreed. A large portion, for example, in America, a large portion of people were against the American Revolution, believe it or not. They didn't want to be bothered. It was actually a kind of smaller group that forged forward for the freedom of everyone. Keep that in mind. It doesn't take every single person to ensure your rights to fight, but we do have to support the people who are willing to do that. And we do have to see their value in the world. So it's only ever been people who have fought for humanity that have ever made a change. It's never been this, the masses have all agreed, and it's always been something exactly like we're experiencing now. And so the people who end up creating the laws, creating the change, are often few in number, but there needs to be enough of the masses behind them to work on their behalf. So that's the general structure of how change has ever been created. That's the truth. So we don't need everybody, right? But we need enough. We need enough. And again, the only way you get that kind of utopian society, it's never through legislation. You can't legislate a utopia. You can't force people to be good. You can't force people to be generous. You can't force people into giving something away. You can't force people into doing good work. It doesn't work that way. All that we can do is spiritually grow and spiritually evolve until we can begin to see the spiritual world as an objective place, just like the natural world. And then once people have their own objective perspective of God and truth that is within their own being, then that is when you get that more spiritual civilization, because there's an inner process of change and transformation that has happened so that they understand that we are all one inside, that we are all united. So why would I harm someone? They're my brother, they're my sister. This is the culture of brotherly and sisterly love that is classified in anthroposophy as the sixth cultural age. That is the utopia that everyone talks about, but it is actually not legislated. It happens through spiritual growth. It happens through spiritual evolution, through spiritual perception that is regained. In order to have that, we have to have a society, we have to have a culture that cherishes and protects natural law. We have to have a system of governance that actually preserves natural heavenly laws on earth, which means people have to be free. We have to have freedom. I don't care how many towers fall. I don't care how many people have died in whatever. We never give up our freedoms. We don't move backwards. Freedom is absolutely imperative. And all of the encroaches on it are evil. Anything that encroaches on human freedom is evil, because we need freedom as individuals, as a culture, in order to know God, in order to speak, in order to be who we are. We have to be free. And that's what leads to spiritual evolution, which eventually becomes a more cohesive society. So that is what we're fighting for, and that is what the death cult is trying desperately to eliminate through attrition over long periods of time. And now, from now and the next 5 years, from now until I'd say 2032, 2033, 2030, we're going to see even larger grasps for power, and this technological juggernaut come even more and more desperate for power. And so this is what we're looking at. Everything is interconnected, and we have to begin to see it that way. Okay. This is from Blue Storm 104. What about people who ignore the ritual timing of Kirk's assassination to insist it was a fake blood, etc.? The denial feels like it is part of the ritual. Okay, so this is another take on the whole faked blood thing. And as I discussed in the prior episode, this is all speculation. You can't really say for sure what has happened because you're not objectively there. However, I do think that if you were, again, to believe that the Kirk assassination was faked and there's a squib, you're basically removing the occult level of analysis, which says, listen, blood is important in occult rites. So the idea of something being a ritual and not having the blood is sort of like you've just removed that entire component, which I think should be considered an analysis thus far. And you're also removing death, which is another major part of dark occultism. So you're removing the two main portions of dark occultism by saying something's fake. That might be something that a group would do to make you not think it was a ritual. So by saying that it is just a fake event, the result of that is to say, well, there's no blood, there's no death, so there's no real ritual power in it. So that's my issue again with this whole idea that it is fake, is it removes the occult element. Now, it is very possible that people could be trying to do that there could be different bots or different individuals that don't want people to think about this. They don't want people to think about real blood. They don't want people to think about real death. They want people to think it's fake because, there have been fake things in the past, ergo, therefore, this is fake too. So it does remove the occult element to think that everything is performative, right? Because you're not thinking about real blood and real death, which is a real part of occult rituals. It's removing that level, which for me is sort of like, I don't feel like, it just doesn't seem like the line of logic is as strong to me as a real occult group that has used assassination in the past. Like, why would they not use it now? What is the argument for them to not do it? Right? So like Kirk is in like witness protection somewhere for why? What is the ultimate, please tell me in the comment section, like what is the ultimate reason for that? Like what is so important about this that he needs to do that? Like, so it's just sort of like, it doesn't make the most sense. There are some arguments I'm sure you can make, but they're not as strong as this being a real assassination. They're not as strong as all as that, in my opinion. And so I agree with you, Blue Storm, that the denial of the assassination almost seems like a tactic in itself, potentially, by removing the occult element of it, by creating more confusion, by also making people sort of detach from reality, by not having to deal with how absolutely disturbing it is that an innocent person was murdered horrifically in broad daylight. I mean, that is a trauma for any person. So for you to look at that and say, well, it's a squib, it's fake, it's cut, is that a way for you or for people who are doing this to just avoid the traumatic experience that they just saw? Is that a way for them to avoid processing the trauma? It's like, we don't have to deal with the fact that there is a wicked, dark group potentially doing awful things for power if everything is like a Q level conspiracy. Like, he's fine, he's like in some tropical place. It's sort of like, is that a coping mechanism? Is calling everything theater a coping mechanism to not have to deal with real death, real violence, and real darkness? I'm asking. I mean, I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying, it seems like we're becoming very overwhelmed with corruption, and it's a way to not have to confront evil is to just say, well, these very dark elements like blood and death, they weren't involved. So therefore, I don't have to deal with the fact that, if they were involved, it's a much darker situation than we could have imagined. All right, this is from Astro Babushka. I love my astrologers out there. I love to see what they have to say because I'm not an astrologer, but I always love like Astrolada, Astro Babushka. Like I'm seeing her comment here, and I want to read it out to you guys because a lot of understanding occult ritual is getting a grasp of astrology, getting a grasp of celestial alignments, because occultism and rituals, they use celestial alignments as part of their recipe, right? Everything from moon phases to eclipses to times of the year like solstice and equinoxes, those are huge chargers, to very special planetary alignments. Right? So this is all part of esoterica. So Astro Babushka says, I've been following your work, Gigi, for many years, even before I began practicing Vedic astrology. I'm so grateful for so many insights. In my own research, I recorded a video just days before this event during the recent lunar eclipse where I explained that assassinations were highly likely based on very careful astrological analysis. I was shocked and, to be honest, pretty scared at how quickly it manifested. I kept asking myself why it would happen in the US at all, since the eclipse wasn't even visible here. That is something that I was sort of wondering too, because there is a thing with eclipses where it's sort of like, where it ekes out in the world is typically the most malefic. So I kept asking myself why it would happen in the US at all, since the eclipse wasn't even visible here. Only when I examined the inauguration chart did the picture become clearer. But I still have one major question. This eclipse was conjunct the star Achernar, the end of the river, but also known as the sword of Archangel Michael. It feels counterintuitive that such an archetype would strike one of its own followers. Does this confirm what you said that at the beginning of your podcast, that the church has been infiltrated and perverted and the ritual was staged right in its heart? It's always challenging to make any definitive comments on who is doing a ritual or who's involved in a ritual because, you can only analyze what you're seeing and what you can basically sense. You can get intuition about it, but that would be more of an experimental sharing, right? So I do like this, and I've never seen Astro Babushka or watched her videos or anything like that. I've just seen this comment. And so I think it's interesting that you mentioned the Sword of Archangel Michael, because I believe that according to Erica Kirk or Charlie Kirk's people, he was actually wearing an Archangel Michael pendant. And that was like an amulet or a charm that he was wearing during his assassination. And of course, we all know that, a pendant can be enchanted, right? You can enchant a necklace for protection. You can enchant it to create a scapegoat. You can enchant it to create different forces and give it to someone. So anytime that someone's wearing like jewelry or whatever, if it's given to them, it could be enchanted. And I think that from an occult perspective, that may be something to look into as well. So I do think it's interesting that you're looking at this eclipse, and it does have to do with Archangel Michael. The other thing too is I wrote a post shortly after about the creation of a martyr. Now, there is a phenomenon when someone is especially murdered, and this increases tenfold if it's publicly so often. They can actually give they can actually give their etheric body to an angel, right? So even though the assassination itself can be black magic, it can be part of a black magic ritual, the actual person and their soul and their essence can be used positively by higher angels. So just the fact that something is a dark ritual, that doesn't capture somebody's soul forever. That doesn't take command of their of their individuality forevermore. Black magic deals with the lowest possible level of the spiritual realm and materiality. It doesn't take control of someone's soul or someone's death process. Okay, so when you see something like this, there's always the potential that this person is being made a martyr, which means that you pass away, but the energy that's left inside of your etheric body can be used by an angel, potentially a solar angel, like a Michaelic angel, and then that can actually be worked into the world. So even though you experience an assassination or a horrible death, public or not, you can actually have an angel use the rest of the energy that's in the etheric body, kind of like a battery, to actually work positively in the world. So that's how this kind of stuff works. It's kind of like how, Jesus was martyred, but then the whole world changed after. I mean, I'm sure the people who were doing that were trying to, rain darkness down upon him, but it actually made him more powerful. So there is this weird thing about evil that doesn't understand good. It doesn't understand life. Evil people and evil magicians, they don't understand life. They don't understand how the angels really operate. They're completely blind to a huge portion of the cosmos. They just don't perceive it properly. They don't understand the real magical world. They only understand the underworld and are slaves to it. So that's where this gets complicated, is that you can have this dark thing happen to somebody, but it can actually be flipped and turned into something positive for the world, potentially. Now, a saint also and a martyr is different. When I made the post, I noticed people conflating the idea of a saint and a martyr. A martyr can be a saint, but they're not the same thing. An actual saint is somebody who has achieved a certain level of spiritual initiation, and their etheric body is transformed to a certain degree. Whereas you can be a martyr, but that doesn't mean you're a saint, okay? But a saint is actually a high-level initiate. So there's a difference between being martyred and a martyr and a saint, and sometimes that overlaps, but sometimes it does not. Just want to make that clear. But there were astrologers that actually we're predicting, interestingly enough, like times of chaos, assassination, things like that. And this is precisely why you see different presidents and different powerful people employing astrologers and psychics privately. They're not going to tell anyone because the public is in a materialist condition and they don't understand that, but you have to have some level of psychic analysis because guess what? Your enemies and the other countries in the world, they definitely have that level within their governance. All right, next question. This is from ARC 11372. Obviously, these people use the natural world to gain power. So I kind of don't understand who these people are. They use astrology as a tool to help control us, which is of God. They want tech to control us, but they want tech to control us. Obviously, they believe in God, correct? They just don't seem ignorant of this fact. They don't seem degenerate, is what I'm saying. Can anyone explain this? Astrology is a tool. Astrology is simply explaining the objective values, character-wise, spiritually-wise, of the different planetary spheres. And the planetary spheres exist within us. So astrology is a spiritual science. It's just a science. It can be used positively. It can be used negatively. It's a tool. Technology is actually the same. Technology is just a tool. You can use it positively. It can be developed positively. There's no objective problem with AI. There's no objective problem with technology. The problem is the people who are developing it are doing so in a way that is poor stewardship. And I've made that argument many different times. I'm not going to get into it, but it's the people who are stewarding it and the way in which they're using it. So technology, even AI, astrology, all these things are tools. They are tools. I wouldn't say they're inherently evil, right? They're a tool. And it's really about the people who are using them, right? So a dark occultist, because you said obviously they believe in God, correct? They just don't seem ignorant of this fact. So they have people who practice the dark arts and who are like a part of a death cult. They have spiritual beliefs, but their spiritual beliefs are completely inverted. And ultimately, they believe that they are the center of creation. And you can see this a lot even in the New Age, where the big reveal is more of like this New Age Gnostic worldview, where the highest level of spiritual understanding is that we're just in this cosmos of like waves and particles, and you just have to become the creator of your world, the creator of your cosmos. You control your life through like meditation and self-awareness. So the lowest form of spirituality is this kind of stuff where you become the center of the universe, where you become basically a creator. You become like a material God creator thing. Because in real spiritual science, the cosmos is not like a bunch of discordant waves. That's materialism. That's a materialist intellectual distillation of what they think the spiritual world is based on natural science, based on a limited perception. Real spiritual science and real mystics understand immediately, people that actually have the ability to sense the spiritual world, understand immediately that the spiritual world is actually life. It is actual beings. That we operate within one great being, which is the Father, right? Which is God, which is not just a wavelength. It's not like a computer simulation, right? It's a being, it's an entity that we operate within. And we operate within the spiritual hierarchies, which are beings. We operate in their bodies. They're not just waves and particles that we learn to control and command because we are God, and our whole life is to create like robots or create like AIs or whatever it is. This is the wrongful use of these things. This is God as the center of the cosmos. This is man being a God. Real spiritual evolution requires humbleness and submission to God, and the dissolution of your lower ego, which thinks that you're God, actually. So there is a complete different cosmology between people who are genuinely spiritual, and spirituality here should create life. Real spirituality is regenerative. It is around life, and it causes real evolution in the human being, which we understand as becoming eternal, becoming immortal, revealed through the resurrection mysteries. That is life. Life is eternality. Life is evolution. But there's, people who operate in the opposite of that, which operate in death. They operate in the death impulse, antichrist, and they have a completely different way of operating. But as you're saying here, they understand astrology. Okay, they understand everything that the light people do. They just employ it differently. One, the dark occultists employ it completely around themselves, around them experiencing more fame, more wealth, more whatever it may be. So they're God. And this is exactly why we see this push for like eugenics. Like we need to live in this Gattaca society all of a sudden. What? We need to genetically engineer like every baby. We need to genetically engineer every one of these. Everything has to be this like advanced technology. Why? We don't even understand nature yet. Yet we have to completely overdevelop technologically. We can't even create harmony with the earth yet. Yet we're going to shoot off into genetically engineering every apple and every animal and every human. This is a disease. This is a sickness. This isn't normal. Right? We have to see that. So the dark side has spiritual knowledge, but they interpret it in a way that is leading to death. They interpret it in a way that it is too literalistic, it's too externalist, and it's often around selfishness. And this is classically called profaning the mysteries. Dark occultism is nothing more than profaning the mysteries on an aggressive level. And then you have the working in the light, working with Christ, and that is you're actually evolving, you're transforming yourself, you're able to objectively see the spiritual world, not false light. So yeah, absolutely. Like you can have access also to the demonic world, and you can summon demonic entities and fallen angels that give you information. They're full of knowledge. They have wisdom. They have a kind of information, and you can get really caught up in that, right? So it's just a different orientation, but they have all the same knowledge. They just don't use it in a way that produces life. They use it in a way that produces death. All right, this is from Callie Persephone, and you said, is the black sun physical? Could it be what a lunar eclipse really is? You are onto it. So, yes, the black sun isn't necessarily physical in the way that the white sun is, or that our sun is. But the black sun is, in my work, in my cosmology at least, it is like the old sun. And it's connected with Saturn, and it's connected with the dark side of the moon, and it is part of the death cult. And so it is like the inverse of the sun, and this is often associated with like Sorot, Antichrist impulse. It's an inversion, but it's not evil. The black sun is not, it's not an evil force. It's actually also a symbol of the feminine. And while the white sun and the sun in general represents the father and the masculine, the black sun really represents the feminine. And when males try to operate within the black sun, that causes complete and total inversion of their being. So what often happens is that you have male initiates, or you have people, and they refuse to work with Christ because Christ requires humbleness. Christ requires you to bow before him and put your lower ego on the altar and say, lead me. I release all my lower centers. You have people that want to live, and even do occult things through complete selfishness. So they refuse to work with the Christ. They refuse to see the Christ, the reality of the Christ. And then they work through a different force, which is often associated with black sun. It can be associated, or they'll kind of fall into the abyss, if you will. And so the female consciousness can go into this quite easily, because the female consciousness is the negative polarity. It is typically associated with lunar forces, with black sun forces, and it doesn't harm it. But when males try to enter into that discipline and operate from there, it is an inversion. So there's a lot of very deep mysteries about the black sun. I've talked about them over the years on my channel here, and we will get more into this in future episodes of Occulted. But I want to just paint that difference between the male and the female in occultism. They are distinctly different. You really can't conflate them. I mean, spirituality is really, a lot of people try to use spirituality to dissolve gender, to dissolve sexuality into nothing. But it's actually the one part of life that, if you really understand esoterica and yourself, these polarities are something that you actually can never change, because it goes down to how your energy bodies are arranged and how your entire system operates. So there is objective structure to your spiritual bodies, to the spiritual world, that cannot be denied or distorted, and it deals with the alchemy of male and female, or positive and negative, or dark and light. And dark here does not mean women are evil. This is not at all. That's not a serious, question. So I talk about this also in Revival in my first few episodes too, if you want more on the polarity conversation. Okay, this is from Lectoman, Leoctukman 294. You guys really get me with these nicknames. Okay, and you said elites use black magicians to incite the war of all against all. The war of all against all is a mystery school concept that is popularized by Rudolf Steiner to describe kind of the final phases of the earth. But it was also talked about by Thomas Jefferson and some other earlier philosophers about just the general condition of how the more humanity becomes an individual, the more we are drawn into confronting evil. And there's a point in the Earth's development where it's there's something that's called the war of all against all, is when everyone sort of turns against each other. And I have a whole lecture on this if you want to know. I think it's called the war of all against all, and I get into that. But part of that is that there's this primordial battle between dark and light that goes on all the time, but sort of near a certain point in earthly and human development, it starts to become all-encompassing. And so you have the battle in heaven quite literally playing out on earth. And this is kind of what creates the war of all against all. And you have this clash between dark and light, which we can definitely see in society. And I do feel like we get to another level when it comes to analysis, when we can start to factor in that there is a spiritual level of battling going on. There is a reason why you're having these weird dreams, or there is a reason why you start to feel funny just before you have to do a presentation, or you have to do something important and suddenly you start feeling like you can't do it, or also why suddenly miraculous things happen to you and you just suddenly have the capacity to do something you felt you couldn't. It's because spiritual forces are always working through us, and that this world is in fact part of their world. It doesn't just belong to us, and we have spiritual forces that are working through us positively and negatively, and that's why attunement is so important. Your spiritual attunement is so important. I do have discussions on this on my website and in classes as well about spiritual attunement, but your attunement is essentially how you're oriented, where your mind is. Do you pray? How are you resonating day to day? Because that is a huge part of the spiritual battle that's going on.